as a social foundation of the future of the cities. This conversation is quite expected because, indeed, today, when we are speaking about living in the city, we speak about schools more and more often. The subject of secondary education of school is today as relevant and raises as many questions as urban planning, public spaces. So the meeting between the city and schools at this session is quite important. It's not a mere coincidence, and I believe this is one of the crucial subjects. I'm happy to introduce to you the participants of our roundtable. It is Andrei Panov, partner of the Bain & Company Consulting Group, Svetlana Romanova, head of Information Technologies and Education of the Department of IT of Moscow, and Elena Markovich, co-founder of the program Teacher for Russia, and myself, Elena Zelentsova, am the moderator today. We have 1 hour, and I hope that we will fit in this time, and I also hope that we will have some time left for Q&A session and discussion after our speakers voice their ideas. I'd like to start with Andrei Panov. I saw that you did a big job evaluating the development of education and its potential. So let us start with you. Good morning. Thank you. Today, I'd like to speak a little bit about the research we conducted. We compared the education systems in Moscow with the education systems of Los Angeles, New York, London, Paris, Dubai, Singapore, and other big cities. We considered the level of knowledge of school children. We also considered the availability of education, the achievements of students, digital technologies, perceptions by parents. I will speak about some of the results of our research. I would like to start with knowledge. We considered the results of different exams. We compared them between themselves. We also considered the international exams conducted in different countries. And we saw that, in general, Moscow is on the 5th place among the 20 cities of the world that we considered. The research is published on our website. You can learn more. But I would like to specify some things. We were surprised by the fact that in Moscow, the availability of knowledge is quite high. The spread of the results of school children is lower than in other cities. On the one hand, this is probably the legacy of the USSR, but on the other hand, it is the result of merging schools together, of the attempt to make conditions similar for students. Regarding the achievements of the strongest students, we considered the winners of international Olympiads by cities. Moscow takes the 4th place. Before there are Singapore, Seoul, and Tokyo. What's very important is to understand how parents treat school education in the city. What did we do? We have some methodology that we are using to compare how service consumers or school students or whoever are ready to recommend the product or the service to the other people that they know. And we polled parents to find out whether they are ready to recommend the school their children are studying in to their friends. if you consider the level of recommendations in Moscow, it is on the medium European level. It is slightly higher than in the world in general. But what's surprising are the results of the recent Moscow education reform. I mean, the merging of schools and the development of profiled classes. What before was elite education is now becoming widespread. And the parents of children who are going to these specified classes are ready to recommend their school more than on average in any other city. We believe that this is also an interesting insight that means that the city is moving in the right direction. Another thing that we focused on during our research is the educational digitalization. We considered all the content and the infrastructure to find out whether the infrastructure of the city allows to use this content. And we also considered the communication aspect. How good is the communication between the school and parents and the school and children? Moscow is again the medium position. In terms of infrastructure, we're witnessing a huge change. And the Moscow schools are now reaching the leaders in terms of the availability of Wi-Fi, of interactive boards, access systems, and so on. In terms of content, this is probably the area where there is still some room for improvement, mildly speaking. If we consider Sydney, for example, 70% of children are already using electronic books, and 10% of them use mostly electronic books. This is not the case of Moscow, but on the other hand, there is the initiative launched by our department that can significantly help. Why are we paying such an attention to technologies? Because we believe that, in general, technologies will completely change the education system at school. Actually, this may be quite controversial as an idea, but we need to consider how digital has changed the other industries. And it takes place in a blink of an eye. The knowledge is accumulating, and then there is radical change. 10 years ago, for example, I worked in a newspaper, and the editor-in-chief said that people will never read newspapers online, but actually almost no one reads paper newspapers today. So there is still room for improvement in terms of personalizing the curriculum. We can have school in the smartphone, we can have virtual reality, and so on. So out of all the industries of city economy, school and education in general represent the highest potential of digitalization. Because a Sydney resident will never ride a bus in Moscow, the Tallinn resident will never go to the Moscow polyclinic just because of distance. Maybe there will be some telemedicine, but it will not be soon and not on a constant basis. But we can witness fast changes when it comes to school education, and the first will win everything. If the first person manages to build a system that will export knowledge to Russia, to the CIS, to the other countries, that person will get a huge advantage. And we see that Moscow has a great potential in that respect. The only issue that we are facing today, and the most crucial one, is how children should use the fruit of the whole digitalization process. For example, smartphones are prohibited at school. The question is the following. On the one hand, you get more and more school software on a child smartphone. We are developing that content. On the other hand, it is prohibited to use smartphone at school. Actually, phones and tablets are prohibited at school in most countries. It's not just the issue of Moscow. And I think if we think about the next step, Moscow has to consider this. We should either allow children to use smartphones and tablets at school, I mean their own smartphones and tablets, so that they don't have to change the model of operation using paper at school and using computer at home. Or the city should ensure that every children have individual smartphones for school. This is a key issue, not just for Moscow, but for the other cities as well. And the solution that the city will find will determine how fast the education will change. That's what I wanted to say today. Thank you very much, Andrei. I would like to highlight that you mentioned a very important idea at the end of your speech. But I think that I would interpret it in a different way. In Skolkovo, I'm responsible for the international school that we have almost launched in 3 years. It was a small school, and it will turn into a big project. The Skolkovo parents are actually mostly people who work in science and technology. Nevertheless, when we are speaking about digitalization, about new approaches to education, paradoxically, we witness a surprising attitude. I would rephrase what you said. I would say that one of the key obstacles to educational modernization is the unwillingness of parents to use modern approaches. And thus, synchronization is not just about having Wi-Fi at school and out of school, or having a smartphone at school and out of school. I would say that synchronization here is that people should be equally ready to adopt new technologies in all the spheres of life, because quite often parents who use modern technologies at work and work with these new technologies are absolutely convinced that children should use paper books to learn, that they should learn things by heart and so on. And when teachers are proposing new formats, play formats, digital formats, that causes suspicion. They suspect that these teachers are not serious. How do you think? How can we work with that? Look, everything is quite simple here. Parents will always be a bit retrograde in that respect, because they learned in a different way when they were kids. I don't know. Are there any kids of 6 to 7 years of age who don't know how to use a smartphone, look for cartoons and so on? But at 4 or 5 years of age, my child Googled the following: where to find princesses in rose dresses. She probably used Siri to Google that. So children are different, and anyway, that will happen. Maybe not at this point, not with this generation, but very soon anyway. So parents need to be educated about the fact that this is the future. I quite agree with you. Indeed, you cannot stop the progress, but I think that we also need to think about synchronizing those processes. What I want to say is that the parent community is also part of the school community and of the city community, and we need to work more with them than we actually managed to do. Yes, on the other hand, let us consider the statistics of using the electronic school journal. When this tool was adopted, parents accepted it quite willingly. So I believe that we need to think about that, but I think it will come naturally. That's a very good example of the electronic school journal. When you understand how useful it is, you start using it, and there are no obstacles anymore. And here it would be logical to give the floor to Svetlana Romanova, who is working on the e-school project in the Department of Education. We know quite a lot about this project already, but in the context of development of the information systems in Moscow that have already reached a very advanced level and are among the leaders, what's the place of the electronic school? How will it develop? Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. First of all, I would like to give a comment about the use of smartphones. We are working with almost all the Moscow schools, and the situation is different. There are some schools where there are some teachers who prohibit tablets and smartphones. There are schools where teachers are using smartphones as a tool for education, and I'm not speaking about the Moscow Electronic School as such and about the opportunities it provides when using tablets. But I'm speaking about just the use of mobile phones, of smartphones. They are integrated into the educational process. They are used to create content by children, so the situation is not uniform here. But I believe that prohibiting using mobile devices at school for children is mostly related to the fact that children are doing something else using these mobile phones. They're not studying, because at home all kids are using smartphones. There are no prohibitions. Speaking about school, indeed, we need to explain to parents that these devices are used to study, and soon, in that case, the situation will change. Going back to the background of creating the Moscow e-school project, indeed, children are different today. We were born during the time of disk phones. The modern children, today's children, were born when every family had a mobile device. They think in a different way. And we have conducted research, and we found out that children are using a smartphone as a tool to use internet, not to call. They have a different vision of communication, on the one hand. On the other hand, we understand that current children are tomorrow's professionals in different areas, and the professions of the future mean that people will use information technologies naturally in various fields. And our goal is to train children, to prepare them to that. And the way the school was organized 10 years ago, not in terms of IT, but in terms of even space, did not really allow to move in that direction. The IT department for several years has been equipping schools and has been introducing automation into the educational and administrative process of the school. The projects were developing gradually, and in 2016 we realized that the equipment that we supplied to schools in previous years was already obsolete, so we needed a new upgrade. But we wanted this upgrade to be accompanied by the change of the educational process, because when there is an interactive board in a class, it doesn't mean that it will be used in the educational process. On the other hand, there was a requirement on behalf of the Moscow teachers. There are a lot of very progressive teachers. Even before the e-school project, they were already using the tools, the IT tools, during the lessons, and we realized, and they realized, that it is interesting, useful, and the teacher is perceived by children in a different way. Children are learning in a different way. So what was very important for us was to change the educational process using IT. I gave the example here. It is the KPMG research of the end of 2016 about how Moscow looked to compare with other advanced capitals of the world. If you pay attention, we were lagging behind in terms of education. The organizational processes were automated at school. Regarding self-education, there were already a lot of opportunities.
In terms of education, however, there were more opportunities for development. And this was because we didn't have any clear-cut individualization of the education process, special for every school child. Furthermore, in many countries, a lot of games and simulators are used for education, but it was not so obvious in Moscow. And furthermore, in other countries, some special subjects are provided at schools, such as bioengineering, that is, sciences that are just being introduced in Russia over the past few years. So, as the project of the Moscow Digital School was developing, we started to pay attention to that. We wanted to show the entire amount of tasks under this project. This is about renewing the infrastructure, improving productivity, so that both the teacher and the children could seamlessly move around schools with the internet, so that they can access the internet and use library resources at any place. On the other hand, we organize a lot of events to popularize technologies, to explain to children what is being done. We have master classes, we have special courses, we test teachers so that the changes that are happening at school today are seamless. We are also continuing to develop systems like cloud accountancy or government services, so that the users can work with digital tools such as the electronic diary, electronic library, and so on. At the first stage, our task was to get as much content in the libraries as we can. And now we think about the quality of this content. We want to make this content better. So what content is there in libraries? It's not only digital textbooks, because during the lesson, the teacher uses not only a textbook but also some materials. Earlier, teachers wrote something on the blackboard, but now the teacher has a lesson scenario prepared in advance or taken from a general library on a cloud. Then the teacher can adapt this scenario to himself or herself and use this library in its own way. Now there are also gamification elements that are being introduced. And we involve a lot of different companies here. The city provides financing to these companies if the materials are interesting. It's different kinds of tests and so on. And our task is to make sure that the teacher has all the optimal tools at one special place, such as a library, to prepare lessons, to give home tasks, to do testing, any distant courses, anything possible. So this project kicked off in 2016. It was a pilot project in a few schools, then we tested it at other schools. The infrastructure is changing slowly, but as to the software, it's available to all Moscow schools today. As the project was implemented, we talked to the teachers, to the school children. We got feedback about the project. Of course, there are negative opinions, and this is natural because no one likes changes connected with their work. But we focus on the teaching process, and when the infrastructure arrives at school, there are tutors who teach the teachers over 2.5 months to work with the new technologies. And children teach the teachers too to work with those technologies. I'm sorry, we don't have much time right now. I would like to ask you a question, if I may. And this question concerns distant learning, distant education. I know that a lot of parents prefer teaching their children at home. There is such a demand from the parents. So do you think that the school could become distant in the future, at least for those children who do not want or cannot attend classes on a daily basis? And what are you doing along those lines? To be honest, we are not thinking about the school becoming completely distant or remote, because there are traditions. We've been discussing this between ourselves and with our users, and we are ready to provide the tools to give a choice. Our goal is to give the choice to everyone. If the child doesn't want to go to school or can't attend school, our task is to use those remote courses. They are available even now at the library, but this is not a fully fledged remote course in our understanding. But the next step is really providing some full courses so that a child can learn from home. That's not the decision by the Department of IT, but that's a decision of the parents. Yes, but we have our Skolkovo school. And now that we have the IB school, we have a department system like in a university, and we have a department of maths, which prepared special software that's an application on the internet. And now that children love resolving problems there, of course they go to school every day, but they meet their teacher just to discuss the results or to set some tasks. And sometimes they even learn new material on a distant basis. But this requires considerable changes to the curriculum. So are you working with that? Are you working with the education department and with those methodological departments? It's not only with them, but we're also working with the teachers themselves. Our approach is like this. We analyze demand, and we provide the tools for that. Of course, we can't do everything at once. There are more urgent or less urgent things, but of course we are going to meet all the needs. And what you have mentioned is also used in Moscow schools. That's about how the teacher is going to prepare his or her lesson. And when we are attacked by accusations that we are going to replace teachers by robots, we show how a lesson can change. Actually, a teacher has more possibilities to pay attention to every child, to look at how the child understands the materials, and how to give some home task to the child based on how quickly the child does what. So we can actually adapt the lessons to every particular school child. Thank you very much. I would also like to speak about what you have mentioned, the robot teachers. Is it possible to replace teachers by robots? There are, of course, talks right now that some jobs are going to be replaced by machines or robots or mechanisms. And there is some point in that, because perhaps when a human repeats some material he or she has learned from year to year without making any changes to their speech, without responding to the environment, maybe it seems to be almost like a robot. At the same time, when a human understands that he or she can give this routine away to some application, to a website, to a machine, or some other things provided by the technology right now, while dealing only with pure art and seeking an approach to every student. Maybe that's a good thing. I've heard about your project, The Teacher of Russia. And indeed, I believe that this is a project which goes hand in hand with modernization of education. Because it's impossible to do anything if we don't work with teachers. A school is all about teachers, and the quality of education is about teachers, no matter how you would like to replace them with robots. Thank you. I would like to say a few words about this project. Maybe not everyone here is aware of it. We are working not in Moscow, but in the regions as well. We also work in Moscow, and our project is focused on the so-called mass school. It's the ordinary school, not a gymnasium, not a lyceum, but an ordinary school attended by most of the children. And we consider ourselves as a resource for transforming those schools. We rely on teachers, on people who can become good teachers, and we try to look for them throughout the country. We train them, and then, together with Sberbank, together with the High School of Economics, we develop and support them. And thus, we form a community of people who understand very well the needs of schools, but who also have all the required competences to develop those schools. That's the idea behind the project. And in our view, this social capital is formed in those mass schools, because the so-called top schools, that's just 10% of the children, and all the others just attend ordinary schools. If we talk about some key issues or points of growth, the main gap that we see is as follows. On the one hand, we want to find some new educational results. We are talking about the capability of managing oneself. We talk about thinking outside the box, about collaboration and so on. Everyone who attends conferences has heard about it a million times. And that goes on top of the academic results. But we understand that if the teacher doesn't possess those skills herself, she can't pass on those competences to the child. And we look at this as a hiring agency for schools, and we really seek teachers throughout the country. We can choose one teacher out of 20. But we have a sentiment that there are very few people on the market who would really meet all those criteria. And that's an issue, at least among those people who would be ready to go to the ordinary school and work there. The second issue, and it is becoming ever more relevant, along with the children's results, we would also like to improve the quality of life for school children, because children spent 10 years at school, and we want our children to be interested in that, to feel that they are not threatened, that they have the right to make a mistake, because there is a tradition among Russian teachers that this ideal is not fully followed, is not fully met. It's very important that a child feels at ease at school, that the teacher feels at ease at school, and it's not happening. Even in Moscow, Moscow has resolved the problem of salaries for teachers, but at what price? The teachers are overburdened. They have to work for 30 hours, but they also have a lot of additional activities. And that's the reality in which Moscow teachers live. And I'm not talking about regional teachers who have the same load of obligations, but their salaries are much less. If we talk about professional support, my personal opinion is that the quality leaves much to be desired, and those programs of support provided to the teachers do not meet the educational standards that we would like to see, that we would like to have for our children. And in actual fact, and this is confirmed by many surveys, a good teacher will give a lot of knowledge to the children even in a bad school, but a bad teacher could even harm the child even in the best schools. So the key issue is how to ensure professional development and emotional well-being for teachers at school. Thank you. You know, I could quote an Eastern proverb which says that the caravan goes as fast as the slowest camel in the caravan. And in these terms, the level of the school reflects those regional schools, schools in villages, in small towns. What can teachers give there? What can schools give there to the students? So please tell me, what kind of systemic changes are possible that could improve that situation? Because you've been working in the regions a lot. I believe that this is the issue of target setting. And we've mentioned parents today, and I fully support this idea. I fully agree with that. The teachers are ready for change, but the parents fear a lot. They think that their children are being experimented on because they were taught in a completely different way than their children. And the key point of growth, to my opinion, is the moment when the parents, the teachers, the school administration, the entire local community is in agreement in terms of what we want for our children and how we get there. If there is an agreement, if everyone agrees, then we move forward. Thank you. And Andrei has a comment. I have a question. Okay. Maybe all the children should be taught by teachers of Moscow and St. Petersburg, and maybe we don't need those regional schools at all, because we understand that the level of schools in Moscow and St. Petersburg is much higher than that of regional schools, thanks to the remote school or electronic school, which I mentioned. Yes, so when we talk about distant learning, yes, that's the same teacher, but maybe she's better and knows more. And teachers from Moscow, of course, we could hire local PE teachers. It's okay. Well, in my opinion, it's impossible, particularly because the education of a student is the process of communication between humans. And we are talking about the so-called ordinary schools, where children are believed to be not motivated. But at first you need to explain to the child why he needs to learn. but for now, no information service has met this task. I would add something, and I think that fits the general theme of our urban forum. What motivates a child is not the story of an adult of how the child will succeed when he finishes school. It's the environment that motivates children. In this sense, when you go to the radio, you have this floating bridge. You have the biggest library in the country. You have a theater, a cinema, any kind of opportunities. And it's impossible to miss that. So in these terms, of course, development of schools should go hand in hand with city development. We can't develop schools without developing cities. Of course, there are some opportunities for growth. Sometimes schools can progress more rapidly than the environment, but it's the environment that motivates.
We still have some time left, so dear audience members, you can ask questions to our speakers. Please introduce yourself. Alexander Leontienko, Metal Group. I am designing a school, and as you have aptly mentioned, I'm trying to create a micro-environment. But it's a regional school, so we are facing the lack of competency, the retrograde attitude, the corruption. And you're also facing the sanitary norms and rules, right? Of course. We know, of course, your Skolkovo school, this Horoshevskaya school, the private school Leto in Moscow, and we are trying to do something. Your program of introducing Skolkovo schools in the regions, how far has it gone? I know that there was a project in Tambov. I now have two schools in the Vladimir region and the Nizhny Novgorod region, and I would like to introduce there all the best things that are in the Moscow schools, including remote education. In the regions, there is a huge lack of qualified teachers. We are trying to use foreign practices such as webinars. My question is, could you help regions? Yes, your question is clear. I think that my colleagues will add something a bit later, but I would like to answer about the use of the Skolkovo experience. Tambov is an exception. That was a competition for a number of schools, and Tambov managed to continue that project. Actually, a school is a unique project each time. It is very personalized. And unfortunately, it is awfully expensive. I'm not now speaking about the building. People are often thinking in terms of buildings, but the goal of e-school is to get rid of this old approach. I love the story that happened many years ago in one of the rich oil-producing regions, when a new museum building was built, and then they had to disassemble one of the walls to bring the exhibit there. And because no one thinks how the building and its content should work between each other. And what's the most precious thing is not the school building, but the atmosphere and the quality of human capital. And spreading such things is very expensive. It can work, but it can fail as well. Today we have some programs we are now preparing some programs because we do receive a lot of such questions from regions. We will try to work with the regions in order to exchange experience. But perhaps someone will manage to make such a school, but it is very difficult because it is something very unique. I would like to add something regarding the Russian electronic school. Maybe you have heard of this already. It is a mix between the e-education and what is actually happening in the Moscow schools. The project, the Moscow Electronic School, turned out to be contagious in a good sense of the word, and many regions are addressing us, the Department of IT, asking how to do the same. We talk about how we did it, and then people ask us what to start with, and we tell them the most complex thing is not to find money and to buy, but to explain to people why they need it, because without that nothing will work. In Moscow there are a lot of teachers who are very enthusiastic, who want it themselves, they are promoting it, and they are making the other schools interesting. And in the regions, if there are such enthusiastic people and teachers, in that case you can do something there. The project, Russian Electronic School, is planning to involve all the regions of the Russian Federation. Of course, some are more ready, others are less ready, but I would like you to understand that the most crucial thing is to explain people why they need it. This is a whole process, because it's all about our mindset and our brain. Any other questions? Thank you very much. I'm Ekaterina Polisova. I represent several organizations, but now I'd like to represent the Moscow School Children Ecology Competition. What is your experience of working with talented children? Who am I asking the question to? To the one who can answer. The Skolkovo school, first of all, of course. You know, we do have a free quota for talented children, but here we need to consider very seriously the very notion of a talented child. We will also organize our own Skolkovo competition. These skill competitions, they exist in a very big number. They are of very different levels. And not every time they are selecting children who are further motivated to show good results. So we will do our own competition. Regarding talented children, we are always at a crossroads. On the one hand, we might think that a talented child means specific results in specific areas. At the same time, there is a humanist assertion saying that all people are talented. The issue is how to untap this potential. And we, based on what psychologists say, decided that a talented child is a motivated child. And then we consider how his motivation allows him to use his creative and intellectual skills, first of all, in research and project activities. So we are trying to create conditions so that children engage into various research and projects from early age, and through that the talent will develop, and thus we are going to support all children who want to learn and who are motivated. I will be grateful if my colleagues add something. Yes, I'd like to add something. In terms of working with the talented children, we do have experience of cooperation with the Center of Talent and Success in the city of Sochi. An agreement was signed between the Moscow government and that project called Sirius. We are helping them to introduce the Moscow e-school technologies. They, on the other hand, help us to understand how to work with talented children, because they do have a very useful experience in that respect. And here, indeed, we can say that all children are talented, and it's not that difficult to work with an identified talent. It is more difficult to identify the talent. And as an IT developers, we can say that if you have an experience, if you have an idea regarding how to do that, we will be happy to learn your experience, any experience, because this is innovation. You can automate anything, any process. The question is how to describe the process, what it consists of. That's the challenge that we need to tackle. Now we're working with Series, but later we're going to do that for Moscow. Thank you very much. This is a very good discussion, because the greatest challenge of digitalization and of the digital economy project is not the complexity of equipment, but rather the complexity of understanding what are the competences needed in the digital area. The creativity, the communicative, flexible thinking that is necessary, how to raise it. This will bring us to the new criteria of assessing the human potential. This will bring us to the new mechanisms of education and bringing up. I don't want to nullify the IT significance, but we may understand how to plug in an equipment. We all understand things about optic fiber and other technologies. Today, in the professional community that is working with the digital and digitalization, there is only a big idea about what's the type of people, what are their skills and competencies that we want to develop. And the word develop is the right word here, not just get. People are not produced by a conveyor belt. It's the computer who is a serious product, but all humans are unique. So the question is how to raise this new ecosystem for people who would be ready to swim in that digital sea later autonomously. That's what we should be talking about, and that is what we should focus all our programs and projects on, including Skolkovo projects, including other analytical and research projects. We have some time left for the last question, please. My name is Larisa Bogdanova, and I'm the director of the program that you're speaking about, the talent development product, the programs, the development of soft skills, and so on. I would like to thank you and say that I believe that in today's world, what's important is not the profession, but the personal qualities that will allow you to succeed in any profession. And I would also like to make a small comment. A teacher will never disappear. I worked in the regions in 30 towns and with a lot of adolescents, and they say that for them, not knowledge, not information, what's the most important thing. People today need support and belief in it, and this is what can be given by the teacher who is near you. Our children will change 9 or 10 professions, and we don't even know the name of their professions, but the knowledge, the ability to think, to be empathic, to communicate, is creativity. These are all the things that will be most valuable. I would like to make a small comment. I believe that creativity is very important, of course, but we should not forget that success is often determined by the universities that you will go, and this is determined by how well you pass the Russian, English, maths, and physics exam. You should also not forget about that. This is also very important for Moscow schools and for any schools, actually. In the current system, the success in a large part will be determined by that, by how well you know the basic things. So, do we still have some time? Because there are people who still want to ask questions. So, really, the last question. Roman 40th. A question that's important for me. I don't know whom to address it. Don't you think that due to global changes that are currently happening, the point where the child's talents will be identified is becoming earlier, not at school? And shouldn't we start education earlier? How should it be built? Should it be done by parents? Should parents be proactive where they should go to identify talents at an early age? Thank you. You know, it's a bit ambiguous. There are very different models in the world. And Russians are very focused on early development. We should do something from the very early age, maths and logarithms at 5 years. But actually, it's not like that. It's not sure, because not in all the countries people start feeding children with knowledge from the very early age. Children should have time to play and so on. We should not follow the path of figure skating, where at 14 years of age you should be the Olympic champion. I will agree with that. Moreover, this aspiration to early development has turned into the thing that is taken into account when people are just planning to have a baby. And today psychologists agree upon the fact that early development cannot be harmonious. If the child exceeds the development in some areas, there will be compensation in other areas. And we have a lot of very able children who are very talented, but they are accompanied by psychologists because they need to compensate that. Because a human being is a balanced creature where intelligence is closely related to motor development, psychic development, emotional development. And in that respect, quite often, making equations at 1.5 years of age will lead to some issues in other areas, and actually it's not also the guarantee of further success in life. I'm very happy that at the end of our conversation we have started talking about the crucial thing. I mean, about children, about students, about the development of children, because without any doubt they are the essence and the goal of this activity. And of course, to ensure this harmonious development, an environment is required. Andrei has mentioned that later they will go to university, someone to Moscow State University, others to Oxford perhaps. And what we need to highlight is that a prestigious university is first of all about the environment and the possibility to communicate with unique people rather than getting some knowledge or information. And in that sense, school, of course, will be different. But school will remain a club where people meet each other, children and teachers and their peers there. And I believe that this is a fact. And I would also like to add that the future of school and of children and of teachers is that probably more people should become teachers, because we understand that not always we were taught by a person who was a formal teacher. Sometimes other people become our teachers, and they teach us things that are most relevant for us. And the modern educational system feels that. That's why there are a lot of people who are invited with master classes, workshops to schools, and these people can also become your teacher. This modern urban environment where public spaces get most value, like Zaryadye Park that we are in now, actually represent an educational environment of the future where different people meet each other in a creative atmosphere, and from time to time they become teachers for each other. I would like to thank our speakers for today's lesson, as well as our audience. Wish you successful work. Thank you.